It is May 17th, and we have some changes in the front line and some big developments in the area of Bakhmut. So we aren't going to waste any time. We are just going to dive right in. This will be a shorter update. Keep that in mind. Some of the topics going on in Ukraine, I am going to get into tomorrow. Some of the bigger topics going on. So this is just going to be the front lines and stuff. The leader of Russian Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has announced that his forces captured the entire private sector of Bakhmut, along with the intersection that Ukrainian forces need to use to exit town. Before I get into the details of that, please consider hitting both the like and subscribe buttons, actions that are totally free for you to do, but are a huge help for me to grow the channel. Now, in terms of Prigozhin's claimed advances, my view is that he is overstating the Russian gains. We do have confirmation from some more reliable and neutral sources that most of the private sector has fallen into Russian hands, but there isn't any word about the intersection. And just so you guys can see what I'm talking about, that's this red circle area right here. The yellow outlined area is the gains that the Russians have made over the last day, and then the yellow outlined and red shaded area is the gains that the Russians made yesterday. So if this is true, and the Russians have advanced this far, then the Ukrainians would probably want to counterattack and regain some of this territory in order to allow for a safer withdrawal from the remaining high-rise area that the Russians are calling the Domino. So that is the area that I have outlined here in the blue square. Something I never went over, and I don't know if these are official names of the micro districts or if the Russians just nicknamed these areas for their battle plan. But the Citadel, the area we're calling the Citadel, is this large high-rise sector, was divided up into three different districts. One was called the Nest, the other's called Constructor, and the last one they named the Domino. And the Ukrainians currently hold on to the Domino, but it doesn't really appear like they will for long. Drone footage shows that the area is enduring pretty relentless. Here, let me get this more situated on here. But the area is enduring pretty relentless artillery attacks. Ukrainians will want to evacuate the area before the Russians literally collapse these buildings on top of them. And that's actively what's going on. We see a lot of Russian artillery in this area. The next area I would like to touch on real quick is Klishchiivka. The Ukrainians have kept up the pressure on the Russians, capturing several Russian defensive fortifications and pushing the front line to a single strip of hedgerows and forests, separating the Ukrainians from the town of Klishchiivka itself. Now, this is a very heavily fortified town. The fortifications can be seen in satellite imagery from 2021, which I believe is currently what we're looking at now. So there is certainly even more trenches and bunkers than what you can see in these images. So I'll go ahead and zoom in and let you guys look at this area. This entire hilltop. We'll go ahead and go 3D real quick so you guys can see the fortifications were originally oriented towards the east, but they do go full circle around the town. But so this entire hilltop is one big, essentially like a star fort. So, however, um, that's the big problem is these fortifications do look towards the east, and the Ukrainians are approaching the town from the west in this direction right here. Sorry, that's not a little thicker. I know you guys like them a little girthier. There we go. Ukrainians are approaching from this direction. So, while this is still a formidable defensive position and the advantage will go to the Russians, if Ukraine can capture them, then it will be a nightmare for the Russians to take them back again. So the Russians would currently have a defensive advantage, which doesn't mean that they're automatically going to win. It just means they have an advantage. But if the Ukrainians recapture them, it will be much harder for the Russians to then capture them back. And it'll be much easier for the Ukrainians to defend this area. So it'll be an even bigger defensive advantage for the Ukrainians. So, if you guys really remember just a couple months ago when this part of the front line was the main topic of some of my videos, the Russians spent weeks trying to move around and attack Klishchiivka on the flanks just to avoid going into this area. So, if you can imagine, the last thing that the Russians would want, and the first thing the Ukrainians would want, is to move back in here and retake this and cause some big problems for the Russian plans here in the Bakhmut area. All right, so there is one more thing that I wanted to go over, and it's kind of a big deal. This was sent to me by a viewer. Last week there was a Russian missile attack and a massive detonation or chain of detonations in the Ukrainian city of Khmelnytsky. Apparently, this registered some seismic data, and we have a record of a magnitude 3.4 earthquake in Khmelnytsky at that time of the event. So very fascinating stuff. If this chart is to be believed, and I don't know why it wouldn't be, an earthquake of that size is equivalent to about 60 tons of explosives. The comparison that the viewer made was that a Davy Crockett nuke, which is a tiny device of about 20 tons of explosives equivalent, I think it's one of the smallest nuclear warheads ever created. That's about 20 tons. So the civilians of Khmelnytsky essentially experienced a blast and shockwave equivalent to 3 Davy Crockett nuclear devices, which is pretty impressive. My point with this is that whatever was being stored at the site, it was being held in multiple warehouses, and there was a lot of it. So I doubt we will ever be told exactly what was there, but it wouldn't be far-fetched to assume that this might have been some kind of munitions intended to be fired at Russians this year. So I guess that's it for me today. Thank you guys for joining in, and until next time.